Laughter echoed through the ballroom when the reclusive billionaire's shadow failed to project against the marble wall. London's elite called it a lighting glitch. They stopped laughing when that very absence of light detached from the floor, wrapped around a hitman's throat, and lifted him violently into the air. Charlotte Halliway adjusted the collar of her emerald-green Alexander McQueen evening gown, trying to ignore the suffocating heat of the Savoy Hotel's grand ballroom. As a senior antiquities appraiser for Christie's auction house, she was used to high society events, but tonight was different. Tonight they were auctioning the Corvinus collection, a trove of Eastern European artifacts that hadn't seen the public eye since the late 15th century. Her firm's financial survival rested on this single night, and the pressure was sitting heavy on her chest. But the real reason her pulse hammered against her wrists wasn't the priceless gold or the blood ruby pendants. It was him, Dominic Croft. He was the CEO of Croft International, a biotech and real estate conglomerate that owned half of London's skyline. Forbes called him a visionary. The tabloids called him a recluse. For the last 5 years, Dominic had conducted all his business behind closed doors, exclusively at night, communicating through a legion of highly paid lawyers. He never attended galas. He never mingled with the hedge fund managers or the politicians. Yet here he was. Dominic stood near the champagne fountain, radiating an unnatural magnetic stillness. He was breathtaking in a terrifying way. His tailored Tom Ford tuxedo clung to a frame that looked carved from marble, and his skin was impossibly pale, contrasting sharply with his raven-black hair. His eyes a shade of amber that caught the ambient light like a predatory cat's, scanned the room with bored indifference, until they landed on Charlotte. A jolt of electricity shot down her spine. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt 10 degrees colder. He didn't just look at her. He looked through her, peeling back the layers of her professional facade to see the exhausted, deeply in-debt woman hiding underneath. Beautiful piece, isn't it? Charlotte flinched. She hadn't even seen him move yet. Suddenly he was standing right beside her. He smelled of rain-soaked cobblestones, cedarwood, and something metallic like ozone right before a lightning strike. She cleared her throat, forcing her professional mask back into place. She gestured to the glass display case in front of them, which housed the centerpiece of the auction, a rusted iron chalice inlaid with cracked sapphires. The Wallachian goblet, Charlotte recited her voice, trembling slightly. Forged in 1462. Legend says it was used by the nobility to seal blood pacts during the Ottoman Wars. Legend is often a watered-down version of a much darker truth, Miss Halliway, Dominic murmured. His voice was a rich, velvety baritone that seemed to vibrate directly in her chest. It wasn't used for pacts. It was used for penance. The blood didn't seal a deal. It fed a hunger. Charlotte looked up, meeting his amber gaze. You sound like you were there, Mr. Croft. A slow, devastating smirk curved his lips. I have a deep appreciation for history, and a deep appreciation for those who protect it. His eyes dropped to her lips for a fraction of a second, a silent caress that made her breath catch. Before she could respond, a burst of obnoxious laughter shattered the intimate tension. Richard Langley, a billionaire venture capitalist, known for his hostile takeovers and abrasive personality, strode over a glass of Dom Perignon, sloshing in his hand. He was flanked by 2 sycophantic junior partners. Croft, I didn't believe the rumors, Richard boomed, slapping a hand on Dominic's shoulder. Dominic didn't flinch, but Charlotte noticed the subtle tightening of his jaw. They said you finally crawled out of your penthouse. What's the matter? Did the ultraviolet lights in your panic room burn out? Dominic slowly turned his head to look at the hand on his shoulder. Richard, you're staining my suit with your mediocrity. Remove your hand. The surrounding guests fell dead silent. The jazz band playing in the corner seemed to dial down their volume. Richard's face flushed an angry crimson. He pulled his hand back, trying to laugh off the humiliation. That was when the photographer for Tatler magazine snapped a photo. The brilliant flash of the camera illuminated the group against the pristine white marble of the ballroom wall. "Wait a minute!" Richard sneered, his eyes darting from Dominic to the wall behind him. The alcohol had made him bold. He pointed a stubby finger at the marble. "Look at that!" Charlotte followed his gaze, and her heart skipped a beat. The chandelier's light, combined with the camera flashes, cast sharp, distinct shadows of everyone in the circle. There was Richard's bulky silhouette. There was Charlotte's slender outline. But behind Dominic Croft, there was nothing. The pristine white marble was completely bare. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone giggled nervously. "What kind of parlor trick is this?" Richard barked, laughing loudly to cover his own sudden unease. "Is that why you're a billionaire, Croft? You spent all your money on some high-tech, light-bending fabric? The man is so fake he doesn't even cast a shadow. Look at it, everyone. The great Dominic Croft is a walking optical illusion." More laughter erupted. It was the mocking, cruel laughter of the elite people who were desperate to tear down anyone more successful than them. They pointed, whispering about projection glitches, experimental fabrics, and eccentric billionaires pulling publicity stunts. Charlotte looked at Dominic. He wasn't embarrassed. He wasn't angry. He was perfectly, terrifyingly serene. But his eyes had darkened from amber to a deep, abyssal crimson. "Optical illusions are fascinating things, Richard," Dominic said softly, his voice slicing through the laughter like a scalpel. "Sometimes the absence of a shadow isn't a trick of the light. Sometimes it's because the shadow has a mind of its own. Enjoy your champagne. It will be your last." He didn't wait for a response. Dominic turned and walked away, melting into the crowd with an impossible grace. Charlotte stood frozen, the mockery of the crowd buzzing in her ears. She looked back at the marble wall, then down at the floor. The hair on her arms stood on end. For a fleeting second, she could have sworn she saw a pool of darkness sliding across the polished tiles, moving entirely independently, slithering after Dominic like a loyal hound. Charlotte couldn't breathe. The atmosphere in the ballroom had grown toxic, suffocating her with the smell of expensive perfume and cheap malice. Desperate for a moment of quiet, she slipped away from the auction floor and keyed her security badge into the private VIP viewing room, a reinforced soundproof vault where they kept the secondary artifacts. The heavy steel door clicked shut behind her, cutting off the jazz music and the chatter. The room was dimly lit, rows of glass cases displaying ancient weaponry and jewelry. She leaned against the cold steel of the door, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath. "You're shaking, Charlotte." Her eyes snapped open. Dominic Croft was sitting in a velvet armchair in the corner of the vault. His legs crossed a 16th-century silver dagger, turning lazily between his long, pale fingers. "How did you get in here?" She gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "The biometric lock. Locks are for honest men." Dominic interrupted smoothly, standing up. He placed the dagger back on its velvet display cushion. "And I have never claimed to be honest. You left the gala early. The auction is about to begin." "I needed air," she said, taking a cautious step back as he slowly closed the distance between them. There was an undeniable gravity to him, a pull that made her want to run toward him and away from him at the exact same time. "Why are you really here, Mr. Croft? You didn't come to bid on the Corvinus collection?" "No," he agreed, stopping just inches from her. Up close, his skin was flawless, cool to the ambient temperature of the room. "I came for you." Charlotte's breath hitched. "Me." "I've been watching you, Charlotte. I know about the debt your father left you when he died. I know about the threats from the loan sharks in Soho. I know that you work 90-hour weeks trying to preserve history, while your own life falls apart." He reached out his knuckles, gently brushing against her cheek. The touch was freezing, yet it sent a wildfire of heat rushing through her veins. "You spend your life surrounded by dead things. I thought it was time you met something truly immortal." Her mind spun. The words didn't make sense, but the raw, intoxicating emotion behind them paralyzed her. "Dominic, what are you—" Before he could answer, the heavy steel door of the vault didn't just open, it was blown off its hinges. Charlotte screamed as the massive metal slab slammed into the display cases, sending a shower of reinforced glass and centuries-old jewelry exploding across the room. Through the smoke and dust, a figure stepped into the vault. It wasn't a thief. It was a professional. He wore a high-end tactical suit disguised loosely as hotel security, a gas mask pulled over his face, and he was holding a custom-modified Glock 19. Attached to the underbarrel wasn't a flashlight, but a specialized high-intensity ultraviolet strobe emitter. Alistair Reed. He was a notorious contractor for Aegis Defense, a man known in the darkest corners of the dark web for eliminating high-profile targets that conventional assassins wouldn't touch. Dominic Croft. Alistair's voice was muffled and metallic through the mask. He raised the weapon, the UV emitter, humming to life, with a blinding purplish-white glare. The board of directors at Croft International sends their regards. They decided a hostile takeover was too messy. They prefer a severance package. Charlotte scrambled backward, slipping on the shattered glass, cutting her palms. She expected Dominic to dive for cover to pull a weapon to panic. He did nothing of the sort. Dominic stood perfectly straight, shielding Charlotte from the blinding UV light. His Tom Ford suit absorbed the harsh glare. He tilted his head, a gesture of pure, unadulterated arrogance. "Alistair Reed." Dominic said, his voice completely devoid of fear. It was the voice of a predator addressing its prey. "My board hired you. How disappointing. I would have thought they'd send an army, not a single misguided stray dog with a sun lamp." "This isn't a sun lamp, leech," Alistair sneered, his finger tightening on the trigger. "It's military-grade UV, and these hollow points are packed with aerosolized silver nitrate. Your secret is out, Croft. The world might think you're just a weird billionaire, but the board knows what you are. They know why you don't cast a shadow. Because you're a goddamn monster." Alistair laughed, a cruel, victorious sound that echoed off the ruined vault walls. "Any last words before I turn you to ash and take the girl as collateral?" Dominic sighed, brushing a speck of dust off his lapel. "I told Richard upstairs. The absence of my shadow isn't a glitch." Suddenly, the blinding UV light flickered. The ambient darkness in the corners of the room began to warp and stretch. The shadows cast by the broken display cases didn't stay on the floor. They defied gravity, bleeding upward, like ink suspended in water. Charlotte watched in frozen horror as the absolute darkness beneath Dominic's feet detached itself. It didn't crawl, it lunged. Before Alistair could pull the trigger, a serpentine tendril of pure, solid shadow whipped across the room. It slapped the Glock out of the assassin's hand with the force of a freight train, shattering the UV emitter and plunging the room back into dim, flickering emergency lighting. Alistair gasped, stumbling backward, reaching for a secondary blade at his waist. He never made it. The shadow, a living, writhing extension of Dominic's will, coiled around Alistair's throat. It wasn't just a trick of the light. It had physical mass, textured like crushed velvet, and cold as the void of space. What is this?" Alistair choked out his hands, clawing desperately at his own neck. He was tearing at his skin, trying to pry away a force that had no edges. Dominic didn't move a muscle. He simply stood there, his amber eyes glowing in the dark. watching the hitman struggle. "You called me a monster," Dominic whispered, and though he was 10 feet away, his voice seemed to echo from the very shadows, choking the life out of the assassin. "You have no idea how right you are." With a sickening crack, the shadow lifted Alistair completely off the floor. The 200-pound mercenary dangled in the air, his combat boots, kicking frantically, overturning a table of antique gold coins. His face turned from red to a mottled purple. His eyes bulged, locked in absolute terror on the billionaire who was currently killing him without lifting a single finger. "Please," Alistair wheezed, blood vessels popping in his eyes. "The board sent you to fire me," Dominic said, coldly. "Consider this my resignation." Dominic clenched his right fist. The shadow snapped tight. The sound of crushing cartilage echoed loudly in the silent vault. Alistair's body went completely limp, his arms dropping to his sides, the life instantly extinguished from his eyes. Dominic opened his hand, and the shadow uncoiled, letting the corpse drop to the floor with a heavy, lifeless thud. In the blink of an eye, the darkness slithered back across the floor, reattaching itself to Dominic's heels, masquerading once again as a simple absence of light. The room fell into a deathly silence, broken only by Charlotte's ragged, hyperventilating breaths. She was pressed against the far wall, her hands bleeding, her beautiful gown torn. She had just watched a man be brutally murdered by a physical manifestation of darkness. Her logical mind, the mind of a historian and an appraiser, was shattering into a million pieces. Dominic turned to her. The glowing crimson in his eyes faded back to a warm, human amber. The terrifying predator was gone, replaced instantly by a man looking at her with profound, tragic gentleness. He walked slowly toward her, stopping a few feet away, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "Charlotte," he said softly. "Don't," she whispered, tears spilling over her eyelashes. She looked from him to the crumpled body of the assassin, then back to his perfectly tailored suit. You're not human." "No." Dominic admitted, his voice laced with centuries of sorrow. "I am the vampire king of the London court, and my board of directors has just declared war on me." He knelt down in the broken glass, ignoring the sharp shards tearing into his expensive trousers. He reached out his cold, impossibly strong fingers, gently wiping a tear from her cheek. "They know I came for you tonight," Dominic said, his gaze locking onto hers with a fierce, protective intensity. "This man was just the vanguard. They will burn this hotel to the ground to get to me, and they will kill anyone I care about to do it." Charlotte swallowed hard, her heart pounding against her ribs like a trapped bird. The fear was overwhelming, but beneath it, burning brighter, was an undeniable magnetic attraction to the monster kneeling before her. "So what do we do?" she asked, her voice shaking. Dominic stood up, offering her his hand. Behind him, the shadow flared again, sweeping out like the wings of a fallen angel. "We run," Dominic said, a wicked, beautiful smile crossing his lips. "And then we hunt." Shattered glass crunched beneath Dominic's bespoke Italian leather Oxfords as he seamlessly guided Charlotte out of the ruined VIP vault. They did not take the main corridors. Moving with a terrifying liquid grace, Dominic led her through the Savoy's labyrinthine subterranean service tunnels, bypassing the panic erupting in the ballroom above. Charlotte's mind was a hurricane of fragmented thoughts. Her hands were still bleeding, slicking the fabric of her torn Alexander McQueen gown. She had spent her entire academic career studying the ancient world, cataloguing myths and legends, only to discover the darkest of them was currently holding her hand. They burst into the underground parking garage. A sleek, midnight black Aston Martin DBS Superleggera sat waiting in the VIP section. Dominic opened the passenger door, practically lifting her into the plush leather seat before rounding the hood and sliding behind the wheel. The V12 engine roared to life with a ferocious growl, echoing the predatory energy radiating from the man in the driver's seat. "Put your seatbelt on, Charlotte," Dominic commanded, his voice a low timbre that left no room for argument. Tires squealed against concrete as the Aston Martin launched up the ramp and tore into the rain-slicked streets of London. Neon lights from the Strand blurred into streaks of gold and crimson across the windshield. Dominic drove with supernatural precision, threading the massive vehicle through traffic at speeds that made Charlotte press herself deep into the upholstery. "Where are we going?" she managed to ask, her voice trembling over the roar of the engine. "Canary Wharf," Dominic replied, his amber eyes locked on the road reflecting the dashboard's glow. "Croft International Headquarters. If the board has declared war, they will be gathered in the executive boardroom, waiting for Alistair Reed's confirmation of my death. I intend to deliver the news of his failure personally." "Who are they?" Charlotte asked, clutching her bleeding palms. "Your board of directors. Are they all vampires?" Dominic finished the sentence, glancing at her. His expression softened infinitesimally. He reached into the center console, pulling out a pristine silk handkerchief, and tossed it into her lap. "Wrap your hands. The scent of fresh blood in an enclosed space is distracting even for me." Charlotte hastily wrapped the silk around her palms, a hot flush creeping up her neck. "To answer your question," Dominic continued, steering the car onto Waterloo Bridge. "Yes, the board consists of the oldest surviving members of the London court. Conrad Pierce, my chief financial officer, is a 700-year-old aristocrat who has never forgiven me for dragging our kind into the modern era. We survived the centuries by adapting, by becoming CEOs, hedge fund managers, and politicians. We traded castles for penthouses and bloodbaths for corporate takeovers. But they don't want that anymore," Charlotte deduced, her sharp intellect cutting through her fear. "Conrad wants to stop hiding," Dominic confirmed, his jaw tightening. "Croft International's biotech division recently developed a synthetic blood substitute. It was supposed to be our ultimate salvation, a way to feed without hunting humans. But Conrad altered the formula. He laced it with a proprietary neurotoxin. He wants to release it into the global medical supply. Anyone who receives a blood transfusion would become a willing, pliable thrall to the vampire court." Charlotte gasped, the sheer scale of the horror washing over her. "He wants to enslave humanity. And I was the only thing standing in his way," Dominic said. "As the king, I have absolute veto power over the biotech division. Conrad couldn't move forward without eliminating me. But he needed a weapon powerful enough to bypass my shadows." Charlotte's eyes widened as the pieces fell into place. "The Corvinus collection, the auction tonight." "Precisely." Dominic smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "The Wallachian goblet isn't just a piece of rusted iron. It was forged in the fires of the Inquisition, quenched in the blood of a betrayed king. It holds an ancient curse. If a vampire drinks the blood of his enemy from that chalice, he absorbs their power, their lineage, and their throne. Conrad hired Alistair Reed to kill me, bring him my heart, and drain my blood into the goblet." Charlotte stared at the passing skyscrapers of the financial district, a sudden chilling realization dawning on her. A wild, breathless laugh escaped her lips. Dominic frowned, downshifting as they approached the towering glass monolith of Croft International. "I fail to see the humor in our impending doom, Miss Holloway." "You're both fools," Charlotte whispered, looking at him with a fiery, triumphant spark in her eyes. "Conrad thinks he's going to use the goblet to take your throne, but he can't." Dominic hit the brakes, sliding the Aston Martin into the private underground loading dock of the tower. He turned to her, his amber eyes burning into hers. "Why not?" Charlotte reached into the hidden pocket of her ruined evening gown. With trembling fingers she pulled out a heavy rusted iron chalice inlaid with cracked sapphires. Dominic stared at it, utterly paralyzed. "How? I'm an appraiser!" "Dominic," Charlotte said fiercely. "I spent 3 weeks studying the Corvinus collection before the auction. I noticed inconsistencies in the oxidation patterns of the goblet on display. The one upstairs at the Savoy. The one Conrad's mercenaries inevitably stole during the chaos." She smiled, a dangerous, beautiful expression. "It's a Victorian-era replica. A very good fake. I swapped it this afternoon and put the real one in my dress pocket to transport it securely to a separate vault tomorrow. Conrad doesn't have the weapon. You do." Dominic looked from the ancient artifact to the brilliant, defiant woman holding it. A low rumbling sound resonated in his chest, a sound of pure predatory delight. "Charlotte Halloway!" Dominic purred, leaning in so close she could feel the cold electric hum of his skin. "You are the most magnificent creature I have ever met in 800 years. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the 72nd floor, lightning illuminating the opulent mahogany-paneled executive boardroom of Croft International. Conrad Pierce stood at the head of a massive obsidian table, holding a rusted chalice aloft. He was a tall, gaunt man with silver hair and eyes as cold as dead stars. Seated around the table were 5 other board members, all radiating centuries of calculated malice. "Alistair Reed is dead." Beatrice Hastings, the head of public relations, murmured, checking her encrypted phone. The tracking implant in his suit flatlined. "It doesn't matter," Conrad sneered, admiring the sapphires on the goblet. Reed was a distraction. He forced Dominic to reveal his true nature in front of witnesses. The paparazzi photos of his missing shadow are already hitting the dark web. Dominic's credibility as a human CEO is destroyed. He has nowhere to run. When he comes here, we will take his blood ourselves. The heavy oak doors of the boardroom suddenly turned to splinters. The heavy doors exploded inward with the force of a detonated bomb, sending massive shards of wood impaling into the leather chairs. The boardroom plunged into darkness as every light bulb in the ceiling simultaneously shattered. Conrad dropped the chalice, his fangs descending with a vicious hiss. "Kill him!" From the corridor, Dominic Croft walked into the room. He wasn't walking alone. The darkness of the hallway seemed to peel off the walls, crawling across the carpet behind him like a legion of serpents. He moved with blinding speed. One of the board members lunged, but Dominic didn't even raise his hands. The shadows beneath his feet whipped upward, solidifying into razor-sharp spikes of dark matter that impaled the attacking vampire against the glass wall. The vampire shrieked instantly, turning to ash that scattered across the polished floor. "Dominic!" Conrad roared, drawing a ceremonial silver sword from a cane at his side. "Your reign is over. You are obsolete." Dominic sidestepped a thrust from Beatrice, his hand snapping out to catch her by the throat. With a flick of his wrist, he tossed her out the shattered window, letting gravity claim her. He turned his amber eyes toward Conrad. "I am not obsolete, Conrad. I am merely under new management." Conrad sneered, diving for the chalice on the floor. "I have the Wallachian goblet. I claim the right of usurpation." "Do you?" The voice came from the doorway. Charlotte stepped out of the shadows. Her emerald dress ruined her hands, bandaged with silk, but her posture was as regal as a queen. In her hands she held the true Wallachian goblet. Conrad froze, looking down at the chalice at his feet. The sapphires on his version were beginning to peel off, revealing cheap Victorian glue. "A fake," Charlotte said, her voice steady and clear over the howling wind outside. "Just like your coup." "No!" Conrad shrieked in absolute fury. He abandoned the replica and charged at Charlotte with his silver sword raised, moving faster than the human eye could track. Charlotte didn't flinch. She didn't need to. Dominic intercepted the strike. He caught the blade of the silver sword with his bare hand. The metal hissed, burning his skin, but his expression remained utterly impassive. "You forgot the first rule of corporate acquisitions," Dominic whispered, his eyes glowing a hellish crimson. "Always verify your assets." Dominic's shadows erupted. They didn't just attack Conrad, they consumed him. A tidal wave of absolute crushing darkness enveloped the treacherous CFO. Conrad's screams were muffled, swallowed by the void, as the physical manifestation of Dominic's power shredded him from the inside out. Within seconds, the screaming stopped. The shadows receded, slithering back to Dominic's feet, leaving nothing but a pile of fine grey ash where Conrad Pierce had stood. The remaining 3 board members fell to their knees in immediate, terrified submission. Dominic ignored them. He dropped the ruined silver sword and walked over to Charlotte. His hand was severely burned, the flesh blackened and smoking. Charlotte didn't hesitate. She placed the real Wallachian goblet on a side table and gently took his injured hand in hers, unwrapping the silk from her own bleeding palms. "You're hurt," she whispered. "I have endured worse," Dominic replied softly, looking down at her. "But I have never had anyone brave enough to stand beside me in the fire." He raised her hand, bringing her bleeding palm to his lips. He didn't bite. He simply kissed the wound, a gesture of profound reverence. As his cold lips brushed her skin, Charlotte felt a strange, intoxicating warmth flood her veins. The pain in her hands vanished instantly, the cuts knitting themselves together beneath his touch. Dominic looked into her eyes, the monstrous king receding, leaving only the man who had been captivated by her from the moment he saw her. "The board requires a new chief financial officer," Dominic murmured, a small, devastating smile playing on his lips. "Someone with a sharp eye for detail. Someone who knows how to spot a fake." Charlotte smiled back, feeling the terrifying, beautiful weight of the world they were about to build together. "I require a very high salary, Mr. Croft. Name your price, Miss Holloway. You already own everything I have." He pulled her into his arms, kissing her fiercely as the storm raged outside the shadows, wrapping around them like a protective velvet cloak, shielding the king and his new queen from the prying eyes of the world. If you found yourself holding your breath during this dark vampire romance, thriller, smash that like button. Don't forget to share this video with a friend who loves billionaire twists and supernatural drama. Want more heart-pounding stories where history meets the occult? Subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Drop a comment below telling us what you would do if you met Dominic Croft. See you next time.